do have a quorum, so we're going to go ahead and get started.
Recording in progress.
Okay, all right. And Senator Limmer's here too. That's awesome to see you in person, Senator Limmer. What we're going to do first is approve the minutes from our November meeting, and then we're going to divert a little bit, just real briefly, from the agenda that you all have in front of you, and allow some testimony on item number 5 from the agenda, because we have one person remotely and one person present that can't stay for the entire meeting. So we're going to divert a little bit, and then we'll get back to the regular agenda, and beginning with member discussion on ALPRs and body cams. So the first item of business then is there a motion to approve the minutes? Representative Elkins moves approval of the minutes. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. The minutes are approved. We will go first to Christy Lottie Johnson, who is here from Hennepin County. And for the tape, she's going to be testifying on item number 5, which is enforcement and compliance with the Minnesota Data Practices Act. So go ahead, Ms. Lottie Johnson, and go ahead with your testimony.
Good morning, co-chairs and members of the commission. My name is Christy Lottie Johnson, and I am the responsible authority for Hennepin County. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today about enforcement and compliance of the Minnesota Government Data Practices Act. I'm going to highlight 3 topics. We need to balance compliance and the risk to data privacy. Current enforcement mechanisms for the Data Practices Act can place government entities in a precarious position. If we produce data and it contains private or confidential data on an individual who is not the requester, it constitutes a data breach, and it would be possible for the individual to file an action for damages. If we withhold data because we believe it is classified as not public, the data requester can file an action for damages for improperly withholding data. When there is a disagreement on how the data is classified, we are often able to work with the requester through informal channels to reach a resolution. Other times, the requester may bring an action for damages against a government entity. Defending compliance with the Data Practices Act can be extremely costly. In a recent lawsuit filed against the county, the plaintiff filed 11 claims against the county. Hennepin County prevailed on 8 of the 11 claims, and we were only required to pay the civil penalty of $1,000. However, the expense to the taxpayers was significant, with the county needing to defend over a dozen depositions and the cost of the trial. The potential legal costs for going to trial can be prohibitive for many jurisdictions, which may cause some government entities to reach a settlement agreement, even if they believe they acted in good faith and have been diligent in their response. The second topic is balancing compliance with operations. We make every effort to comply with the Data Practices Act and must balance responding to requests for data against the county's various obligations and duties as a local government entity. In its 1990 decision, Montgomery Ward and Company versus Hennepin County, the Minnesota Supreme Court quotes from an article of one of the 1982 issues from William Mitchell Law Review, titled Data Privacy, Everything You Want to Know About Minnesota Government Data Practices Act. The authors of this article, Mr. Gemberling and Mr. Weissman, state, the purpose of the Minnesota Data Practices Act is to reconcile the rights of data subjects to protect personal information from indiscriminate disclosure with the right of the public to know what the government is doing. The Act also attempts to balance these competing rights within the context of effective government operations. Hennepin County received 7,741 data requests in 2024. 3 of our largest departments have staff dedicated to only responding to data practices requests. For all the other departments, the assigned staff have many responsibilities, one of which is to respond to data practices requests. Storing data is cheaper than it used to be. Searching for and retrieving data is easier than it used to be. That said, each document must be reviewed to mitigate the risk to private data. In the first 8 months of this year, Hennepin County conducted 51 searches of emails in response to data practices requests, and staff have needed to review 107,000 items to ensure that private data is protected before releasing it to the requester. On average, staff are able to review 55 emails per hour. So in the first 8 months of 2025, Hennepin County staff have spent approximately 3,091 hours reviewing emails for data practices requests. Finally, balancing compliance and requester expectations. Many in the public have unrealistic expectations about how government data is stored and retrieved. Hennepin County is a large county with a myriad of operations. We have a lot of data. At any point in time, we have approximately 180 million emails in our system. Hennepin County staff create 3 million chat messages a month. We have 114 million documents in OneDrive, SharePoint, and Teams. In addition, we have another 1,000 repositories where data and records are stored, including Hennepin County systems, partner systems, SaaS and vendor solutions, as well as print and physical records. Making a request to a government entity for data is not like performing a Google search. No entity that I'm aware of possesses only searchable databases, much less ones that are connected. Here's an example of a request we received earlier this year. I am seeking data from 2017 to current related to the following contracts, proposals, bids, or RFP responses submitted by or awarded to my company. Any emails, internal correspondence, or communications regarding my company, including those involving its ownership and employees, performance evaluations, complaints or audit findings, invoices, payment records, and scope of work documents, any investigations or reports related to services provided by my company. In this case, as part of the email search, we pulled 29,821 emails to be reviewed. The request was submitted on August 20th, and on September 2nd, just 9 business days after the request was submitted, we received a follow-up from the requester asking what our delay was. As part of another request, we were asked for email communications and any other written communications, including Teams messages between your agency and HUD staff from January 20th, 2025 to present, concerning the content, editing, guidance, or approval of the HUD annual reports or programming reporting. In addition to the general request, the requester provided a list of 52 search items, including such terms as home, climate, instruction, and compliance. Just setting up and completing the email search took one of my team members approximately 4 hours at a cost of $50 an hour. The requester ends their request with the statement that they are willing to pay reasonable fees for processing this request, up to $25. Hennepin County fully supports government transparency. We take our responsibility to protect individual privacy seriously. We can only achieve these 2 goals of the Minnesota Government Data Practices Act by adopting common sense and administrable approaches to responding to data practices requests. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Lottie Johnson, for your testimony. We'll let you be on your way. And the next person we're going to hear from is, we have a couple of questions. Co-Chair Feist, go ahead.
Thank you. I was just curious, has technology helped at all in terms of creating efficiencies in processing these requests? And on the flip side, is technology also making the problem worse? Like 3 million chat messages is a lot. So I'm just curious, like, how the evolution of technology has facilitated your process of responding.
Ms. Lottie Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Co-Chair. Yes, technology has helped in searching and retrieving data. We have gotten much, much better at it. It's not the technology that's the issue. It's the fact that everything that we pull, we have to review to determine whether or not we can release it. So even if it's not private or confidential data, we sometimes get requests that are for security, that are for data that could have security implications, and we have to review that and make sure we're not releasing something that could create a risk to the county infrastructure or something like that. And I think that I'm not going to say that it's technology's fault we have more data. I just think the reality is, even besides us, there's just more data out there in the world. I mean, we all work through technology now in so many ways that we just have more data, and that's just a fact.
Representative Elkins.
Just real quick, how often do you get an extensive request and then the requester in the end doesn't bother to come and pick it up?
Ms. Lottie Johnson.
Representative Elkins, Madam Chair. It's pretty rare, actually. We do use a data portal, and so we have made a decision to not charge anyone for data if it's less than $50. And what we have done, we've started to tell them what we think the approximate price is and ask them if they want us to move forward. A lot of times we are able with that to have people change their data request and try to narrow the search a little bit, which is really helpful. The other times they're willing to pay us. Very few people say, oh, I'd rather inspect then. But there are some people that do that. And people, when they've made that decision to inspect, typically show up.
Thank you. Any other questions? Senator Limmer.
Thank you, Madam Chair. When someone makes requests for information and they give you the fields of search, let's say there's 3 fields that they mention, do all 3 fields have to be in the same document, or are they separate, siloed as you? I heard the word instruction or home. If you had the home and instruction in the same search parameter, you'd have to find a document that would have home and instruction in it combined. But is that how it works, or is it separate? So you use the word instruction, and quite honestly, there's a zillion documents in any organization that would have the word instruction in it. So are we over-searching in that regard?
Ms. Lottie Johnson.
Senator Limmer, Madam Co-Chair. Welcome to my world. Yes, what happens is people will give us the search terms, and people have gotten very sophisticated in how they ask for data because of the ability to do searches. And so they will say, use this, search for this word, or this word, or this word, or this word. And so those 52 search terms were or. Yeah. And that's what we get. So it's a challenge, and we've tried in a lot of cases to narrow that down. And some people are willing to, and some people are like, well, I'll just wait. So,
Senator Limmer, follow up?
No.
Okay, thank you. All right, thank you for your testimony.
thank you so much.
Next, we're going to go to Steve Crone, or Cron, who is on Zoom. Thank you for being here, and go ahead with your testimony. If you'd like to introduce yourself for the tape, that would be great, and then you can proceed.
Sure. Good morning. My name is Steve Crone, and I want to first just thank the commission and the co-chairs for allowing me the opportunity to present this morning. It truly is an honor for me to do so. I also want to say thank you for accommodating my schedule. You can probably see from my funny outfit that I'm a dentist, and it's a busy time of year in a dental clinic, so really, I do appreciate that. About me, I guess I'm a husband. Currently, I'm a JV basketball coach, but also, like I said, a dentist, small business owner. But for the purposes of what I'm testifying about this morning, the important factors are that I'm a parent and a citizen. And my involvement with the Data Practices Act really began about 4 to 5 years ago, having really no interest or need for it prior. My kids were given a survey in school that other parents were sharing was highly inappropriate. And not knowing if that was true or not, I went to the school and asked them if I could see the survey. And I was told promptly that I could not. And that gets your attention as a parent, and you say, excuse me, well, where can I see it? They said, well, we don't have it. And I said, who has it? And they said, well, the company we hired to do an equity audit for the district, it's proprietary information on their part. And so as you can imagine, everybody has their work lives. I was venting about this to some coworkers and just happened to have one of the employees say, you should be in touch with a relative of mine who's an expert on data practices laws. And I said, well, what are data practices laws? And long story short, I was put in contact with this individual, and he proved to be just a tremendous mentor for me and was able to start to teach me about how to use these things, really irrespective of what I wanted to use them for, just the purpose of this is the law, this is how you use it appropriately, understand what is government data, what is not. And so began a journey for me that's gone about 5 years, and now I do have an active interest in this and have used it on many occasions for various purposes. I'd first want to say that recognize that the Government Data Practices Act, as I've started to look more and learn about it, they're very well written. Minnesota Statutes 13, we're starting from a good place as a citizen, and it's quite a tool for a citizen, because it's one of the ways that we can keep government accountable to us. We're the ones that do pay for government, as we should. Government represents us. We have responsibilities to it, but it has responsibilities to us. And that's one of the tools that we can use to keep that accountability. So I guess the first question is, should we make changes to enforcement and compliance? And, there's some critiques. We've heard some testimony. I've read some testimony that this is very burdensome for a government entity to get these requests. And is it? Yeah, it probably is. And I guess my answer to that is, well, dang it, it should be. When do these requests come in? Data requests generally aren't coming in when citizens feel that a government entity is behaving perfectly. They come in when they feel they're overreaching, perhaps behaving inappropriately, or in the case that I discovered with the School for Us, behaving in a way that many people feel was overtly political. So it is burdensome, and it should be. That's important because it provides an incentive for the entity to behave and to check some of those political actions at the door. And of course, government entities aren't supposed to have political actions. Reality is we're all people, and everybody does. The flip side of that, is it burdensome for the individual, such as myself, to request information from government? And the same answer, yes, it's very burdensome. And dang it, it should be. Because we as a citizen have a responsibility and a duty to do this in an appropriate way. And being a burden also provides an incentive on us to kind of check passions at the door and use these only when you really want to find out information. And that being a burden is important for that. But is compliance with this a major concern? And yeah, it is. I've joked in the past that getting a government entity to comply with a data request could be its own Olympic sport. I currently consider myself about a silver medal contender in that sport, but I will promise you it's a full contact sport. And that gets to be the challenge, but also a little bit of the entertainment value of it as well. And what do I mean by that? So, for example, due to really good coaching by the person who was my mentor on this, I learned to make very simple requests. Ask for one thing, maybe two things. So on requests, even as simple as, can I see the survey that was given to my child at school? Or can I look at a single government contract that you have with, an entity? Even for those kind of requests, here's some things that I've learned. Generally, you have to fill out any number of specific request forms. I'm getting cranky as I do this now, and I basically just use my own, but you oftentimes have to fill out theirs. You generally have to send dozens upon dozens of emails clarifying things that shouldn't need to be clarified. Even on simple requests, suddenly the person working on your request doesn't understand basic words out of the English language, it seems. And so you have to work through that. You universally get an email back stating that it's going to cost you several hundreds of dollars usually for your request. And then you remind that, nope, I wanted to inspect the information. Then generally follows a period of radio silence, generally 30 to 35 days, with no information at all, at which point I generally will start emailing again and reminding that Minnesota courts have generally recognized 30 to 35 days as quote unquote reasonable, as the statute says, for most requests, and then remind them that I'm asking for one piece of information. That shouldn't be that complicated. And once that 35 days hits, usually then more and more emails, sometimes to oversight boards and superiors asking for compliance. I've found that I oftentimes have to send certified letters asking nicely for compliance, then oftentimes have to send certified letters threatening litigation if they don't comply. And have even had to go so far as working with attorneys to have demand letters sent, again, even for very straightforward requests. There's other techniques that I've learned along the way that have been entertaining. Not trusting one time that the information I got was correct, I've had to send kind of cross requests to two different entities that probably had the same information. And I found out doing that no, one of them was lying to me, and we were able to then meet in person and, establish that and get that one addressed. I had another government entity one time just simply not respond, pretended like their emails weren't working. I then had to use a different email address, pretend I wanted to purchase, in this case, some curriculum, and suddenly I got a reply immediately, and on the return request said, oh, by the way, I really don't need that, but can you respond to my data request? So you have to learn some of these other techniques, and that's why I laugh and say it's a bit of a full contact sport. But again, some of that stuff you expect, and that's part of this, should be a burden on our part as well to do this. And so what recommendations do I have to potentially make changes? As I looked back of what it generally takes, some of that stuff I said in joke, but generally it takes 10 to 50 emails, in my experience, to get a data request fulfilled. It takes a minimum of 40 to 90 days, even when asking for one item. And the majority of the time, it took one other, what I call kind of extra pressure technique, something where you got to think a little bit outside of the box. It's not as simple as just submitting the request and they send you the information. So what I recommend, I would change the language of the statutes only when absolutely required, because again, we're starting from a good place. The statutes are good. I would say recognize that conflict, and being a burdensome process are actually okay. It seems counterintuitive, but I think that is actually okay because it forces communication and ultimately cooperation and compliance for both the government entity and the people looking for information. Based on other testimonies, and I would agree, I would consider lowering the $1,000 fee for the Office of Administrative Hearings remedy. That's a remedy I would have used at one point for a dispute, but that $1,000, I didn't know if it was worth it for what I was likely to receive for it. But kind of my key recommendation would be we need education. I think education would fix the majority of the issues. I look back at my own experience, and without a really valuable mentor that was able to teach me and guide me in the right direction on what Minnesota Statutes 13 says, I would not have had a clue, nor would have I had a clue how to use it appropriately. That educational component really unlocked the door, and I think it would address the majority of the concerns with burdensome requests as well. Requesters a lot of times simply don't know how to do it effectively and how to do it in a way that is easier for government entities to comply with. And so whether that would be in-person trainings, whether that would be videos, online education, whatever it might be, I would really focus and recommend that education is probably far more important than specific changes that would potentially ruin what is already a really good product. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Crone. And just one quick question from me, at least, is were you able to get your hands on that survey?
I was. That one took a demand letter. And the reason they didn't want to give that one up is they did actually violate federal law with that survey. And I think they knew that and didn't want to hand it over. So that one, pardon the phrase, was like pulling teeth to get that one.
Very good. Any other questions? Co-Chair Feist.
Thank you. I just have a really granular question. I was just curious if you could give some examples or one example of like when they asked for clarifications on terms that really didn't need clarifying.
Go ahead, Mr. Crone.
That one was one I was looking for a lot of this stuff related to the school, and it's neither here nor there. I obviously came into that admittedly as a partisan. I felt the school was behaving inappropriately and asking things of the kids that they shouldn't have been asking. But as an offshoot of kind of some controversy there, they formed a committee of individuals that were going to address and deal with some of the concerns, but then they wouldn't tell anybody who was on the committee. And so as I was asking for the names of the government employees assigned to this committee, I had to kind of repeatedly state like which committee I was talking about. It's like, come on, you know which committee I'm talking about. And exactly which names do you want? It's like, okay, things like that. And there's been several other examples. That's the first one that comes to my head. But times where, and of course the entity at this point that I was dealing with is it's people that I don't say I know them well, but I know who they are. They know me. Some of those things didn't need to be clarified and caused, days, if not a week or so of delay unnecessarily.
Thank you. Senator Limmer.
Dr. Cromie, could you reveal to us the agency or department that was giving you so much trouble in 40-day delay in the information that you requested?
Dr. Cron.
Yeah, thanks for the question. The most common one was actually just our local school district. I faced significant delays also from actually the Department of Education one time, and Resource and Training and Solutions, which is our local government service co-op. And those ones with delays, the school was the biggest delay generally. The other ones were pushing 35, 40 days generally, but always had to involve some follow-up emails.
Thank you.
Senator Limmer. All right. Representative Elkins.
Dr. Crowan, have you looked at the resources that the Data Practices Office in the Department Administration publishes? And are those the resources you're referring to of us having referenced? And would you have any specific suggestions for how those resources might be improved?
Dr. Crone.
Yeah, thank you for the question. Those are resources that, again, the individual who was kind of considered my mentor and teacher in this stuff initially guided me towards that, and it was very useful. My personal experience is a little cumbersome to wade through. And I'm just thinking to the average parent or citizen, it's a little bit much to find that through some of the department web pages and things. And it would be maybe easier as if there was a specific page you say, all right, here's a link, and it kind of explains, this is the Minnesota Government Data Practices Act in a nutshell. This is how you write a responsible request, maybe with some samples and things. So yes, it was very useful. It just took a little bit more effort than what probably the average person is going to do. I think the average person submitting the really big requests probably just, in my opinion, writes them out because they don't know any better.
Representative
Probably
Elkins.
needs to go through the looks.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much for being with us this morning. And stay in touch. Dr. Crone, thank you.
Thank you.
Members, we're going to go back to our original agenda with item number 2 now. As you can see, item number 5 is going to be up for some lively discussion. I'm sure we have a lot of people testifying on that. But we'll get kicked off here just with member discussion on what we heard last meeting about ALPRs and body camera reporting requirements. And I would direct members to, there's some additional testimony in the packet from a couple of entities on this subject. And we've had the body camera and the ALPR statutes. I want to say it's probably going on 10 years. And so it's appropriate that we're taking a second look at that. And I did, just for members of the commission, I did have one of our staff members just go, because I get all the reports on the body cameras and the compliance on that. And so I had her just compile for the last couple of years, go through all of those and see areas of noncompliance. And I was surprised that there were several. And so I know I've heard rumors out there that some of our agencies don't want to continue to have to do these audits and provide us information, but I think it's way too soon to say, no, you're on your own, because there were some very elementary things where the statute should have been followed and it wasn't. So that's not the end of this discussion, it's the beginning, but I'll open it up for members' comments on, I know it was a month ago when we talked about this stuff, but yeah, anyone have any comments or questions? Yes, Co-Chair Feist.
Thank you. It's like an awkward placement of the mic and my computer, but I have some notes. So just on the point that you were making, I do think that there are some just highly technical updates that we can be making to address to some sort of inconsistencies in kind of what we expect of local law enforcement, to make it easier for them and easier for us to then be able to understand. But yeah, I noticed one recent area of noncompliance was just not realizing that the statute had been slightly updated and that they weren't providing all of the necessary information. So grateful that we had some testimony at our last hearing and the materials from Daniel Gazelka, who works with a lot of these local law enforcement agencies to provide these reports, and wanting to like just think about like what are we trying to achieve, and it's not just paperwork for its own sake. So I'm really happy to be having this conversation. And then I have just like I want to take it to like the 10,000 foot level. And I wanted to just share something that happened to someone I know in the last week. She was stopped by ICE 5 times in one day. 3 of those times were while she was driving. And she is somebody who's law-abiding. She was not speeding. She was just running errands. And she was stopped 5 times. So it's really clear that the information that is being collected is being shared and it's being used in ways that are not intended, which are to protect public safety. So, so clearly this person was stopped based on how her name sounded. She has a Latin American name. And the last time that she was stopped, she was pulled out of her car and she was bruised. And her documents showing that she was here legally were thrown at her. And, you know, we have a system of pervasive warrantless surveillance, and right now it's impacting one community, but it impacts all of us. It's building records of our behavior, our patterns of behavior, and this approach to surveillance, this approach to public safety, it's just building a record of all of our behavior. It's really problematic, and it's like a just-in-case approach to surveillance that I don't think serves our state or our communities. And then we'll be talking in our next topic about how this data is being shared nationwide, which is really alarming. And so, yeah, so I just feel really strongly that, you know, this happened to somebody I know because they have an immigrant-sounding name. But when it happens to one group, it can be used against all of us, depending on who is in power, depending on who has access to this technology. So I think we need to be really thoughtful. When the statutes were created, we did it very thoughtfully, and it's really clear that the technology is not being used in the way that we intended or hoped. So I just wanted to share those thoughts.
Thank you, Co-Chair. Representative Elkins.
This is a new topic for me, and so I have a newbie question, which is why are communities sending us individually their annual reports?
That's a very good question. The legislature, when we rolled out this legislation, wanted to make sure that that the law was being abided by. So what we have are these biannual audits, and they check for things like, is the data being destroyed when it's supposed to be destroyed? What's the retention period? Are they having a public hearing prior to obtaining body cameras, for instance? I don't remember exactly off the top of my head all the other laws that went into particularly the body camera stuff, but that's kind of a way of just checking to make sure that this use of new technology is not being abused, and that it's a learning curve, right? When you get this new technology as an agency, there is a learning curve to learn how to properly use it. And so we just want to make sure it's being used appropriately.
You know, I wasn't questioning the usefulness of the
Right.
reports. Just wondering why they're being sent to us individually for
Oh, yeah. Oh,
communities.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Yeah, it says which committee members, so you're probably sitting on a specific committee that is being told that they need to send that information to you. Oh, and this commission. There you go. Like, why are you getting all these strange audits? Yeah. Anyone else? Yes, Senator Lucero.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And somewhat related to Rep. Elkin's question, although not directly, I had been, in the course of the last few months, actually, this year, I found myself explaining when it comes to technology and the advance of that and in the hands of government, how it can be a threat to civil liberty, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm bringing up this specific instance of the body cam. And so this topic was super hot when I was first elected. So you're right, it was 10, 12 years ago. And so just as a friendly reminder, and what I'm explaining to people is, we take body cam footage for granted now. But back in the time, if you think about this, some of the conversations that were taking place in the legislature were law enforcement videoing and capturing data when they might be in your house, right? The Fourth Amendment has a very, it's a sanctuary, your place of abode. And when law enforcement comes into your house and they're capturing that footage, bringing it back, putting it on government servers, who has access to it, how long is it saved, how is it purged, how is it deleted, how is it backed up, et cetera. These are all among those questions. So one of the controls that we put in place as part of that was to have these audits to ensure and try to find that balance between the need for capturing video and then civil rights and the threat that this information or video footage in the hands of government can pose. So thank you, Madam Chair.
Right, right. And I will ask our two kind of IT guys that are on this commission. One of my greatest concerns is, most of this data for ALPRs or for body cameras is being held by a third party, or it's in the cloud. And what I don't know is on these, and I wish one of these auditors was here, maybe it's a question we can email to them, but just how are you verifying that that information is not being shared? Because they're supposed to keep a log of every time that they share it, and there's supposed to be a law enforcement purpose. And I'm really curious from you guys' standpoint, how an auditor would go in and make sure that that information isn't going out and it's not being logged or something like that. Okay, Senator Lucero, go for it.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And it's actually the answer to that question is something that you have been fighting at least the entire time I've had the privilege of serving with you, and that is audit logs. The existence of audit logs, which tracks who reads something, who downloads something, whatever action it might be, reading, downloading, sharing, modifying, et cetera. The capturing and retaining of those logs on what historical actions were performed on the data is the method that an auditor would use to verify what actions were taking place, including sharing. But in the absence of that, there is no way.
Right. Co-Chair Feist.
And it's interesting because if you look at like the Flock company's website, they're like, oh, we would never share data unless we're asked to by, the customer. But if you look at the letter that the ACLU of Minnesota submitted, they looked at Flock policy and Flock contracts. And their contracts say Flock, in its discretion, may disclose footage to other entities, quote, if Flock has a good faith belief that such access, use, preservation, or disclosure is reasonably necessary to comply with legal process, enforce this agreement, or detect, prevent, or otherwise address security, privacy, fraud, or technical issues, or emergency situations, which sounds like anytime they want. Like, they're just like, but we're gonna disclose it if we feel like it tomorrow. And that's bad. That's really problematic. Yeah.
I feel some bill bubbling forward from Co-Chair Feist. Representative Elkins.
Yeah, I think there are only a handful of vendors in this space. Should we have them come testify?
We should. Yeah. We can obviously, as a legislature, determine what goes in those contracts and some of the language. And you cannot, enter into a contract like that unless the specific law is abided by. So obviously, any other discussions over this topic? All right. Well, there's going to be more in the future, I can tell on this one. We will then move on to item number 3 in the agenda, data privacy as it relates to the interplay of state and federal government. And first on the docket is Julia Decker. Welcome to the commission. Please state your name for the record and go ahead with your testimony.
Good morning, Madam Chair and members. Julia Decker, Policy Director for Immigrant Law Center of Minnesota, or ILCM. ILCM is a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization that primarily provides free legal services for immigrants and refugees across the state of Minnesota. As Representative Feist mentioned, this is a particularly critical moment for surveillance technology, privacy, and immigration. And I think while some of us in this room can have reasonable, good faith disagreements about federal immigration policy, I think we share a lot of common ground when it comes to surveillance technology and privacy. Immigration enforcement actions by the federal government have provided fertile ground for the proliferation and use of warrantless surveillance technologies, often without transparency or oversight, and that has serious implications for all of us, citizens and non-citizens alike. For example, recently facial recognition technology has been deployed via a cell phone app called Mobile Fortify. And according to internal Department of Homeland Security documents, no one is allowed to decline a scan by this app, regardless of whether they're a US citizen or not. And the photos will be stored for 15 years. One of the most enduring problems with facial recognition technology is its inaccuracy. It's led to wrongful arrests in 5 states. And a wrongful arrest can cause significant hardship even for a well-situated US citizen, even more so for people like the folks that our office serves, including low-income immigrant victims of things like domestic violence and human trafficking. Recent reporting also indicates that some iteration of this technology may have been released to state and local law enforcement as well. This type of rapid, non-transparent, federally imposed expansion of surveillance should be concerning to all of us on all sides of the political spectrum. I think Minnesota has moved proactively to try and push back against some of the more detrimental aspects of widespread warrantless surveillance, and I think the state should continue to do so in light of what we are seeing at the federal level. There are serious implications not only for the communities that our office serves, but for each and every one of the communities that all of you serve as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I'm curious, and I think you might be able to provide some insight. It occurs to me that I believe we have some sort of statute about facial recognition technology. Maybe I'm wrong about that. Looks like Representative Feist might, okay. All right, well, maybe we should get one. But my point is that when evidence is brought to trial or goes through some sort of judicial proceeding, there's the question of admissibility. And if law enforcement is using technology that it's not supposed to use or not authorized to use, or that's not part of its official, somebody just downloaded it on their phone and is using it, wouldn't that potentially be considered inadmissible evidence?
Madam Chair, Representative, so my understanding is we do not currently have a statute on the books with respect to facial recognition technology, so there would not be any prohibition on the use of the technology with respect to admissibility.
Thank you for that clarification.
Yeah, that was something that, as I remember, I don't remember, I think it must have been the body cam legislation that I worked on. I tried to add that those cameras couldn't use facial recognition technology applications, but I didn't win that battle. If I remember that conversation correctly, but there have been bills in the legislature, trying to prohibit it. Obviously, we want to get the bad people, right? And it's always with any kind of technology like this and our civil liberties, there has to be a balance there, and it's very delicate. So, but thank you. I don't know who is first. Representative Elkins, go ahead.
There is a provision in the Consumer Data Privacy Act that classifies all forms of kind of biometric data as sensitive personal data, which means that a company can't sell that kind of data to a data broker or other third party without the subject's advance permission.
Yeah, thank you for that. Senator Lucero.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And to answer Rep. Hudson's question, there are multiple bills, and there has been for a couple of years now, bipartisan, on trying to put controls in place on facial recognition, et cetera. But unfortunately, yeah, nothing has passed, as was already said. But the reason I wanted to speak to the testimony here is one of the things that I try to do when explaining this to people who may not necessarily have a technology background, or why should they be concerned? I share your concern. The compelling of the capturing of, whether it be the face or any other biometric or any information, is definitely a concern and has a chilling effect on civil rights. But the analogy I use is, let's take away all the technology. And how would the same action take place in the physical realm or traditionally? And the way that government would have collected such information on people in the absence of such technology would have to be, they'd have to either follow them, they'd have to monitor them physically somehow, whether it be the house across the street, following them on the street, something to that effect. And as we can all think, if that were happening, if we were engaged in our day-to-day lives and we had agents of government following us and capturing different actions that we made, different purchases we might make at the store, different businesses and or wherever we might be driving or walking to, and retaining this information, that would be red flags and cause for concern, especially if there wasn't any probable cause to be doing so. And so now, if you take that same action, and most would understand, that is something that is a chilling effect in the society that we live in. We don't want such actions by government. Now, when you layer on technology, they are able to do so remotely, very out of any visibility, and or capturing this, you said, for 15 years. That same concept has the same concern, at least for this senator. And when government is engaged in that behavior, and I'll take it to the next level. If government is purchasing and or collaborating in any way with the private sector who's engaged in similar behavior, that has the same effect. And that is a huge concern. But as the chair mentioned, it is a balancing act. It is a delicate conversation because we need to balance the core function of government, which is public safety, with that of privacy. And so it is delicate. But boy, as technology is advancing, and when in the absence of any regulation, it is going to be used to an extent that does create concern. So thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator. Co-Chair Feist.
I think it's just also worth mentioning that it doesn't make us safer. I have a bill regarding reverse warrants, and the way that has been described is if you're looking for a needle in a haystack, it's increasing the size of the haystack exponentially. So when we are using these imprecise, inaccurate tools, we aren't actually making law enforcement's job easier, and we are not more effectively, catching the bad guys. So I think that's worth mentioning. It's not like we're sacrificing our freedoms in exchange for security. We're kind of getting neither, which I think Ben Franklin said, or something along those lines.
Yeah, thank you. Any other member discussion? Representative Elkins.
I'm plumbing my memory, and I recall that a couple of sessions ago, Representative Gomez actually had a bill related to facial recognition used by law enforcement, and the testimony consistently, Minnesota law enforcement officials are saying that they, to the extent that they use facial recognition, it's only to generate leads. They would never actually arrest someone strictly based on either geofencing, which is another thing that we worry about, or facial recognition to by themselves to charge someone.
Thank you.
But we might want to codify that.
I think I was a co-author on that bill. Anyway, which it would be a rarity around here with Representative Gomez and myself. But anyway, thank you for your testimony. The next person we have, Mr. Neumeister. Welcome to the commission. Please state your name for the record and go ahead.
Co-chairs, members of the commission, my name is Rich Neumeister. One of the differences between federal law and state law in regards to privacy is that there's no secret file in Minnesota. If you look under 1304, we as individuals have a right to find out what kinds of information the government has on us. If it's public, if it's private, within 10 days, they must give that to us. I've helped many people, all the way from folks who are demonstrating in the Wall Street and Black Lives Matter, all the way to the folks on the other side who are, for pro-life and thinking that they were being surveilled, and they wanted to know how can they get access to information about them that the government collected. So that's one big difference between the feds and the law. Now, in regards if it's confidential, we've had this for 50 years, you're told that. Yes, we have confidential information on you, so then I can go to court. That's why I make the broad statement. We're far ahead of many entities on many kinds of things. That's one of them. And that is part of what we call the Fair Information Principles. That was part of an HEW, Health, Education, Welfare, before it became the federal Department of whatever it's called now, Human Services. And those have been guiding principles for access to information about ourselves. Now, in the comments, I want to relate a little bit about the facial recognition. There is only one statute that I believe that the word in general with government that facial recognition applies to is the drone statute. You can't put facial recognitions on the drones. It's, when you're old like me, you come across, you're involved in many of these dynamics. And as many people know, facial recognition has been one of those things that have been discussed for 10 years. And whether or not the legislature is going to take action, like some states have done, outside of the private sector. But with government, who's going to pick up that battle? That's a different ballgame. And reference was made to Aisha Gomez, who I was working with at that time on this piece of legislation. And we talked and we met, but government entities did not like it. And so they did that. I also want to say the differences, and Matt Elling with MNIT did a great piece about the differences. But one of the other things I want to sort of say is our law for access to public information and data is much better than the standard FOIA, and I can give lots of reasons for that. So in summary, I encourage you to review MNIT's dynamic, and there are some differences, but we got some pretty good laws here. Madam Chair, members of the committee, thank you for a few moments of your time.
I did want to encourage members of the commission and of the public to look at what Minnesotans for Open Government put out. It's a really well-done piece on the differences between FOIA and between the Minnesota Data Practices Act. And one of those is just the basic premise that in Minnesota, we start with the premise that all government is public. And the federal government is more like, these are all the exceptions to things that make it not public. And so it's two different dynamics entirely that those two laws are based on. Senator Limmer.
Thank you, Madam Chair. You're right in that, and Minnesota's what I would call a privacy state. It's not perfect, and we may still need to go a little further at certain times. But in this discussion, as we're talking about interplay between state and federal, the first area I thought of was Minnesota's Fusion Center. This is where law enforcement or reports to law enforcement are collected about just about anything and everything regarding the actions of citizens. Perhaps a person yelling across a fence line in anger at someone. That could go into a police report, and that police report can be put into a fusion center where that information is shared to the federal government. Strangely enough, the fusion center, even though it's supposed to be an interactive back and forth relationship, the federal government gives very little information to Minnesota. We, the state, give almost every report to the federal government, which I've always questioned. The the other area that I thought of was Health Records Act, and how our Health Records Act in Minnesota is a bit different than HIPAA, which is federal. And that information can sometimes be recorded and transferred to federal entities. Federal entities, I don't know where the federal entities, if they share with the state. But they justify it in the terms of epidemiology in the event that there might be a future epidemic. Everyone assumes that speed is of essence, and therefore that justifies the collection of personal health record data on our citizens. That too is in question in my mind as well. To a degree, I understand epidemiology to an extent, but at the same time, do we have to collect everything on everyone? We even got to the point of collecting blood samples from every single newborn child in the state of Minnesota and collected it until the federal government, no, the Supreme Court said that it was unconstitutional. And I think that even was challenged later, and the State Department of Health continued to do that despite a Supreme Court ruling, which had to be then challenged again. And I believe the Supreme Court still said that it was unconstitutional. So there is a lot of area that we have to watch carefully in this area. I can understand where issues of personal safety, security, whether it's security financially or physically, that may be justified in sharing information in the pursuit of fulfilling the purpose of government, and that would be the safety of its citizens. So, as you mentioned, Madam Chair, when it comes to data records, there is always a balance that we have to find. It's a balance between what the government needs to know versus the privacy of individual citizens. And so far, Minnesota's going in the right direction, but it's being challenged all the time. Every single year, there is a challenge, mostly by private interests coming to the state or a government interest wanting more information for whatever purpose they deem appropriate. But it's wise for us to have discussions like this so we learn a little bit, so we can be those outposts in the legislative committees and give information of what we have accumulated, because the legislative process does not allow us to have the time to analyze these issues in detail. So it's important for us to continue to have this discussion, and we're just skimming the surface even now.
As since we're quoting founding fathers, right? Like the price of liberty is eternal vigilance, and I feel like on many levels in this realm, at least, Minnesota is pretty vigilant. So thank you for those comments. All right, anybody else? Co-Chair Feist.
Sorry, I'm feeling chatty. Senator Limmer, you just gave me an idea for our next hearing to invite the BCA to come in. You know, we have these new Fusion Center reports, and I know I look at them like each February when they come out. I don't know if anybody else is like, ooh, the Fusion Center report is out. But I think it would be really interesting for them to come and talk about what information they're receiving and sharing, obviously within the bounds of the report. I'm really interested in the balance of like how many suspicious activity reports they have and how many lead to actual like active investigations and prosecutions of people and arrests, because we can see kind of how that balance of surveillance and actual law enforcement interact in that report. So maybe we can invite Superintendent Evans to come and tell us what he thinks about the report.
Very good suggestion. Anybody else? Representative Elkhorn. What did I say? Elkins.
Yeah.
Eichhorn.
Just really quick, you know, this has been kind of focused this morning, but more generally in terms of data privacy law, At this point, the federal government doesn't have consumer data privacy laws other than the subject-specific ones like HIPAA and HITECH, Fair Credit Reporting Act, Gramm-Leach-Bliley. And so as a result, and there's not really much of a momentum right now in Congress. But as a result, we're up to, I think now 19 states have passed their own. All of them, but except California, which was the first, are built on the same general framework that was originally devised by a state senator in Washington. So there's a high degree of commonality among the various state data privacy laws, and the attorneys general of the states that have passed them are all cooperate on enforcement right now. When we passed ours, we gave provided funding for the AG to hire 3 or 4 more people, and they're starting to staff up the function. Our law became effective at the end of July. And there is some behind-the-scenes work going on at the federal level. I've spoken with Republican staffers in Congress on the House side who are behind the scenes trying to build a new federal bill. But there's no expectation that Congress will pass anything probably this session.
Thank you for that update. Senator Limmer.
Madam Chair, I don't want to belabor this, but there is a growing discussion about when private sector collects data and then shares it with government sources, and in turn, reverse. And that's an area that Minnesota really has not gotten into. I'm always concerned that when I get in my car and my phone lights up and it tells me where I'm driving to, because of the pattern that I have established and someone is watching, always watching. And I'm a little concerned about that. Every Sunday when I go to church, by the time I get out of the driveway, it'll read, you have approximately 14 minutes to such and such address. Driving conditions are good. And I'm a little concerned that someone is watching where I'm driving every Sunday morning. Or if I happen to frequent a coffee shop on a Friday morning where I meet a bunch of old guys solving all the world's problems, and it'll tell me that that's where I'm going. And if that information was shared with government, I'd be very concerned. I'm concerned that the private sector, it knows it, and they can share it in between different private sources all the time. And we're at the point that I don't really know how we can get around or get ahead of this, or put a lasso around or set parameters on this type of information, and whether or not how far do we go in as a government controlling private sector either. Again, it's the balance issue.
Yeah, at a minimum, private sector should have to have a warrant, right? For sure. And
Well, when government wants information or wants something, yes, we still need a warrant. The private sector, when they are searching for information, they do not.
yeah.
And then they in turn might be able to share it with a government source.
Yeah. Senator Lucero.
So the remarks that Senator Limmer just had reminded me of a screen capture that I took recently, and I don't have it in front of me at my fingertips, so I can't pull it up, but it was of a news article that I'll say Google, but it's not, the concern is not specific to one technology entity, but this was a lawsuit where even though users had tracking disabled, you're familiar, this looks like Rep. Elkins is shaking his head, they had it disabled, and nevertheless, they were still capturing the data on private individuals. And the lawsuit, I can't remember if it was $400 million that was the fine, or if it was 400 million users. I don't remember which one it was, but I don't recall offhand. But then I took that screenshot and I put it side by side with another headline, Google announcing their new AI Google Glasses, which is going to be able to see and hear everything around you. And so if you take that precedent of capturing data despite the wishes of the opt-out, combined with capturing everything that is seen and heard around you, that is a huge concern of the private sector capturing information and who they might share it with, even if it's another private sector entity or the government.
Just say no. I mean, how many of us, if we leave home and we realize don't have our phone with us, are in a panic, right? A lot of this is just, and I think those private actors would say, look, you're the one that's, got the phone, you're the one that's got the glasses, you're the one that's got all this technology. So here you go. Representative Elkins.
So I've become something of an expert on the subject of locational data privacy. In fact, on Monday, Bill McGovern, who's the dean of the University of Minnesota Law School, who is also a data privacy and expert, and I did a webinar for the Center for Transportation Studies at the U. I'm not sure if it was recorded. If it was, I'll send you guys the link. But I could present for 15 or 20 minutes on this subject, and the things that I would tell you would be hair-raising. So I'm happy to do that if you'd like.
Yeah, please share that. Please do share that, Representative Elkins, if you get that information. All right, we are going to move on to our next topic because we solved that one clearly. Go ahead.
The short answer is under the state data privacy laws, there is a carve-out that says if you need the data, even sensitive personal data for law enforcement purposes, you can get it with a warrant. So, and it's very detailed and it's out there.
Thank you. Let's move on to transparent artificial intelligence and the Government Alliance, TIGA. And we have John Eichten, the Deputy Commissioner of MNIT. We're so thankful that you're here today and looking forward to your presentation on AI. I'm sure this is another one that we'll have solved by the end of the day. While they're getting set up, I'm assuming some of you, probably you hear daily about AI, but I was listening to the radio this morning. They were talking about the Department of War is now contracted with an AI just for non-classified purposes, but I think they chose Gemini, and so it's going to be used for summarizing and I think we all think of the Terminator and building this, indestructible, soldier or whatever. That's not what this is. This is a little less than that. But anyway, so just to open that topic fresh anew, thank you, Deputy Commissioner Eichten, for being here, and go ahead with your testimony.
Thank you. Good morning, Co-Chair Scott, Co-Chair Feist, members of the Commission. Thank you for the opportunity to address the group today, provide an overview of MNIT's governance approach to proposed use of artificial intelligence tools by state agencies. For the record, my name is John Eichten, and I serve as MNIT's Deputy Commissioner. And Brandon Hirsch, our Government Relations Director, is here with me today as well, helping out with the slides.
Welcome.
Thank you. So TIGA, yes. The word comes from a boreal rainforest in cold weather climates, actually. I thought it was very illustrative acronym to use, but it stands for the Transparent Artificial Intelligence Governance Alliance. And this really started several years ago with the emergence of generative AI technology and around the time of the rollout of ChatGPT. MNIT recognized that a different approach to governance was going to be needed, particularly for technology acquisition, in order to vet the potential application of AI technologies by state agencies and the coming integration of AI capabilities into the tools that the state already uses to power service delivery. Many, if not most, if you hear ads on TV for IT tools of any kind, the word AI has been embedded into the marketing for that tool almost 99 times out of 100.
Recording stopped.
Do you want me to continue, Madam Chair?
Let's wait till we get back online.
Sounds good.
We're okay. Go ahead.
Very good, okay. I think maybe the AI doesn't want me to continue.
Recording in progress.
As I said, what that means per technology tool, that it's AI enabled or it's AI powered, varies greatly. When we talk about AI, we can be talking about a host of different capabilities, everything from generative AI, which has been sort of the rage since ChatGPT, to machine learning, to RAG, to image generation. And so it was going to be important that we had a governance process that goes beyond what it traditionally is focused on, which is security, accessibility, the sustainability of the technology as part of our overall enterprise technology landscape, and to really look at what is being proposed here to use artificial intelligence, what form of AI, and is it being approached in a way that's responsible and with attention to information security, as well as a host of other principles, which I'll get to in another slide. So we established TIGA. It's a cross-functional group. It's to advise MNIT and our agency partners on the responsible adoption of AI to improve how we deliver programs and services to Minnesotans. So it's a very deliberate response to what we really saw as the coming power of AI, and to seek to embrace the transformative potential while also creating governance processes and standards to ensure its responsible use. So one of the initial efforts of TIGA was to establish guiding principles that can help MNIT and our agency partners recognize the value of generative AI and associated technologies while also ensuring that adoption doesn't come at the expense of safety and security. These guiding principles, as you see here, reflect the importance of privacy and security, transparency, user-centered services, workforce empowerment, and innovation, among others. We also went further than principles to develop policies, standards early in the emergence of Gen AI. Foundationally, MNIT's public artificial intelligence security standard ensures that employees understand their responsibilities that really flow from the same data protecting requirements that apply across all of our daily work. They also apply when using AI. The standard allows for the use of these tools with public data, but prohibits use with non-public data while ensuring humans, not AI, are the ones making decisions. The core of the standard rests on security categorization standards, data categorization standards that have been in place and widely accepted for years across the executive branch. It also explains how to use services safely without disclosing non-public information such as PII, usernames, passwords, tokens, keys. It also provides a couple of very simple use cases for how to use AI-enabled services. And of course, agencies may and do impose additional, more restrictive guidelines for use. So this is really an enterprise security standard that creates a baseline from which agencies can add additional requirements in order that fit their unique business needs. So to give you a sense of what the governance, the overall acquisition governance process looks like, take a look at the slide here. We built on an existing governance process through the Enterprise Services Architecture Review Board that, as I said, was already reviewing security, accessibility, the potential for the technology, if there was going to be a need to integrate it with other enterprise tools before the agency went to buy it and to later find out, oh, MNIT can't integrate this with Microsoft Teams or whatever other enterprise tool they wanted to integrate it with. We wanted to ensure that there was an additional check there as well. And so we've layered on this AI review to that process where there's a need for it, right? There's not a large volume at this stage, but it is something we need to build to get ahead of what is likely coming in the future. So that overall process, it's a diverse function of technologists. It's a close partnership with our business partners to address their business needs. New AI capabilities will follow this process, but on the next slide, I'll try to expand a little bit on the additional focus. So we knew early on in the Gen AI revolution, governance would need to have a unique focus for AI. We had asked every agency to identify an AI lead. Someone in this could be someone at a leadership level. It could be someone at more of a middle management level, but someone who could act as a conduit to MNIT to understand what is the agency potentially exploring, to understand what other agencies are doing in this space, how they are looking to constrain or to ensure the responsible use of the technology, and to create more awareness around the risks associated with AI-related work and apply an appropriate level of resource to try and mitigate any of that potential risk and really improve our visibility into what is being explored. I'll give you an example of one application that has been implemented, and we actually won a National Association of State CIO award for, which was really a state award. It wasn't really a minute-driven or a minute award, but the Department of Revenue and their minute team collaborated to develop an AI tool to assess the work product of the legislature. So as bills are being introduced, they need plenty of people time, people power to go through every bill that's introduced and flag it for a potential impact on the state tax code. And then to route those bills to someone within the department who could do a deeper analysis and understand, is there an issue here? Is this something that we need to go visit with a particular legislator about? So they leveraged AI and some Microsoft Power Apps, workflow capabilities to greatly reduce the amount of staff time required to get through that bill review. I say that to give you an example of the type of low to no risk use cases that are being explored right now as really efficiency gains, really productivity gains for the operation of state services. So I'll move on to AI risk assessment. So risk assessments, these are crucial tools, as Senator Lucero, Representative Elkins know, in the IT space and in the security space that have been in practice for various disciplines for years. Our risk assessment contains questions designed to reveal risks, guide staff toward possible risk mitigation. We view AI tool development and acquisition through multiple lenses of risk management. Several aspects of the key questions relate to the roles of humans in AI in regards to automated decision-making. And inherently, any application of AI that would have automated decision-making is where the most significant risk comes in. And obviously, you all know that. So how do we look at the risk level? How do we categorize the risk level? We actually built off a framework that had been established in the transportation space for connected and automated vehicles. And as you can see on the slide here, established really 5 levels of risk that really speak to the level of autonomy that's being given to the AI to perform certain tasks or process certain information. I will note here, again, we are not aware of any services in state government where automated AI decision-making occurs. So think about that sort of medium to high level, levels 3 through 5. At this stage, that is not an application of that type of AI in that sort of context is not something that is on our radar as MNIT. Employee training. I will call back to the guiding principles referenced at the beginning and around the committee, our recognition that the state workforce must be empowered to safely and responsibly use AI. This is something that every large organization is contending with right now in terms of to what extent do they give sort of standard AI-enabled productivity tools to their employees. There's a cost that's associated with that. There's potentially a risk, especially if your data house is not properly maintained and organized, that data leakage can occur if you're using some of these tools and your data estate is not well managed. But a big piece of it is training employees, on how to use this in a way that can make them more productive without replacing their judgment as human beings. And that is an expectation and responsibility of their job. So we partnered with an organization who's distributed this curriculum in several other states, brought it to Minnesota. It's available through the state's enterprise learning management system. All employees have available to them these modules within the state's learning system on the key principles of responsible AI use. Beyond this training, we offer regular coaching sessions on enterprise AI tools that are available to agencies through our AI Champions initiative. And since this spring, over 4,000 state employees have attended over 40 optional training sessions to better understand this technology. And last but certainly not least, I want to highlight that MNIT hasn't been on this journey alone. Since the Gen AI revolution began, we partnered closely with the State Technology Advisory Council, who have advice and guidance and helped support state agencies and Minnesotans as we move forward. Some time ago, I want to say 2 years perhaps now, the TAC formed an AI subcommittee to bring intention and focus to this work. That committee is kept apprised of our tools, the development, we've kept them apprised of our tools, our governance processes as they've been stood up, updated on state policies across the nation, as well as developments at the federal level. Further, the subcommittee has included a regular cadence of experts in the AI industry who bring use cases forward, experience, and guidance to highlight new opportunities on how we might improve service delivery in a responsible manner with the aid of AI. So I want to thank Representative Elkins and the other members of the legislature who are members of the TAC for that continued advice, questions, and guidance to ensure we're striking the right balance here in the responsible use of AI. So Vice Co-Chair Scott, thank you again for the opportunity to testify today. From the MNIT perspective, there's great potential for AI to improve the way we analyze data, to improve customer service, to improve the impact and reach of our communications, but doing so really requires great care, great and very careful consideration to properly weigh the benefits and the risks. We welcome continued partnership with this committee and others, as well as our ongoing partnership with the TAC to ensure we're moving forward responsibly together on this emerging and likely continually evolving front that is the AI revolution. So, thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you for that. And I have a couple of questions, but one would be, what is the specific, if you can kind of give us a glimpse into this, what are the specific trainings that you're giving government employees to verify that the information that they're getting through generative AI is actually accurate? How do they test it for accuracy?
So, Madam Chair, that's a great question. Ultimately, we train employees that they should not be relying on any information from AI to make a judgment on its own. It can be a highly effective productivity tool in terms of perhaps summarizing meeting notes from a meeting that occurred. But what we tell folks is you don't then get to just hit send and send those meeting notes out to every attendee, because there's a chance that you could end up misrepresenting what actually occurred in the meeting. So the guidance is to take that initial output, to review it for accuracy. If you don't know whether it's accurate, then this is, it's engaging in some level of research to determine if something is accurate or not. But the application of these tools in its current form isn't done in a way that would lead someone to make a judgment about a certain need or an action. These are the state's use of these tools at this time are really focused on productivity and efficiency gains, not on trying to automate decision-making or information that we're sharing out to the world.
So thank you for that. And how would the public know if government used AI to produce a public service announcement, for instance? Would the public necessarily know that? Is there anything that you're recommending? Do they have to put some sort of disclosure? What about that scenario?
Madam Chair, we don't have any policy recommendations as the IT service provider agency to the state on, what sort of transparency folks would like to see in terms of how AI is leveraged. I will say, I would guess that almost every press release that most organizations are putting out right now, you can assume there's probably some level of AI that's being involved in that. I'm not speaking of the state government, but it is so ubiquitous throughout the industry now, and I think that it is the idea of using a tool like that to generate a first draft of something that then you're later refining and revising is a good productivity booster. Whether that there would be reason to then require that some sort of AI label or something on a press release that goes out, I think that's a public policy decision that, as operationally focused service providers, I would defer to the legislature on.
Right. Thank you for that. And then I've looked just briefly into what some other states are doing. I know Arkansas, and it says here enacted, this is from NCSL, I think. Arkansas enacted legislation that clarifies who the owner of AI-generated content is, which includes the person who provided data or input to train a generative AI model, or an employer if the content is generated as a part of employment duties. So I think that enters into a whole nother realm of whose data is that? Just like the discussions over healthcare data, is it the patient's healthcare data, or is it the person holding the data? And so do you have any, have you addressed that at all?
Madam Chair, excuse me, I'm a little unclear on the question. I apologize. In terms of
Determining who owns the
ownership
data that's
of
AI generated. When you're feeding
I see.
it, if you're feeding it in, summarize the November 20th meeting of the XYZ agency.
Madam Chair, thank you. I apologize, or appreciate it, the clarification. So the data, the output of generative AI tools that are state sanctioned, right? So, which would be primarily one tool right now, which is just part of the standards, part of the Microsoft suite, which is Copilot. So Copilot Chat, which is this is different from the larger Copilot. I don't want to get into the weeds, but it's essentially the same thing as ChatGPT, but it's integrated into some of the Microsoft products, and it is behind essentially the walls of security, of essentially an environment that has been FedRAMP certified, that has been, that follows all the exact same rules as our email system and other capabilities that we have. So if I'm an employee and I say, can ask Copilot Chat to summarize the meeting, the output that comes, the data that is produced from that, is state data. That data could be requested via a data practices request. It is not Microsoft's data, that is our data.
Okay, thank you. Member questions, Representative Elkins.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So a couple of days. Sorry. Thank you, Madam Chair. So when TIGA first came out, I was seeing that and there are a few states where they are passing state legislation requiring this kind of stuff. So I approached Doug Robinson, who is the president of the National Association of State CIOs, and I said, Doug, have you looked at our stuff, and do you think we really need to write a law about that or this, or is MNIT already doing what needs to be done? And he said, no, Steve, TIGA is actually, other states are using TIGA as a model for their own policies. And he said jokingly kind of that the one thing that Commissioner Tomes might appreciate is legislation allowing him to require the state agencies to do it. So I brought that back to Commissioner Tomes, and he said, no, I'm not having any issues. The agencies are pretty much complying with this. And I don't think that it really, at this point at least, that we should or need to write anything into state law, because everything is changing so rapidly that I think the states that are trying to codify this right now are just creating a huge ongoing burden for themselves in terms of having to continually update their statutes as the technology changes. So I think we're in a good space right now. With what's going on here, I am a member of the TAC AI subcommittee, and have been regularly attending the meetings as well. Plus the national group of state legislators from around the country that our Representative Bonner and I are a member of that regularly compares notes across states. Probably it's a commission on cybersecurity, data privacy, and now AI. Senator Lucero was once a participant on that group as well. Most of our programming right now is AI related, and so it's giving us a good opportunity to stay on top of this. And I'd say the consensus among most of us that there are relatively few use cases that are really ripe for legislation, and the ones that are ripe, things like deep fakes, revenge porn, we've already passed laws governing those. So, and then the last thing I'd point out is that Senator Rest has actually kind of started an initiative to use a variation of generative AI called retrieval augmented generation, to basically where you would train a model on the state statutes, the research papers that have been done by House and Senate research staffs, to create a generative AI model that would make us and our staffs more productive in terms of crafting legislation and checking it against what's already there in law, finding conflicts, finding ways to shortcut the process to make all of us and our staffs more productive. And I think that work is ongoing as well.
Thank you. And I'm not sure that we shouldn't codify some of this, but if there's some like general framework that we can do, I think it might be worth doing. Senator Lucero, I think, was first.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Deputy Commissioner. One of the remarks that you made caught my attention is that you had asked the different agencies to put forward a representative to speak to AI in their agency. And that got me to thinking, I can recall, it's been a number of years now, but if I'm thinking back 8, 10 years ago, there was resistance by some agencies when it came to MNIT, of taking out MNIT, just by means of background for those who aren't aware, MNIT was brought forward as a way to have shared services instead of each agency having their own IT staff and their own servers and their own technology systems, et cetera, to have MNIT as a shared services entity, and then these agencies as a way to enhance productivity. But there was resistance by a handful of agencies to not give up their own technology and processes. So my question is, with that background, when you had requested a member from each of the agencies to work through a collaborative effort across the board for state government, did you encounter any resistance, and or are there any agencies that are not putting forward a representative and or are engaging in duplicative effort that you're doing?
Deputy Commissioner.
Madam Chair, Senator Lucero, great question. The short answer is there has not been resistance. There may be a couple entities out there who maybe have yet to name someone to the community of practice. I'd have to check the list, but in general, the interest has been really high. And it comes from across the board. There are folks who are on that group who are excited about the transformative power of AI, and there are folks who are really scared about where this could go, and they want to get their foot in the door from the beginning to help shape what that could look like. And that was really the intent of the group, to allow all voices in, to learn from each other, to be transparent about where we're going and what we're trying to guard against. So, and just stepping back, I appreciate you raising, some of the challenges there, because you were around during those early days of IT consolidation. One thing I would just say is that since the pandemic, I would say the recognition of the power of unified enterprise IT has really been cemented. There's a clear understanding now that if one was to propose, let's all go back to each agency having their own data centers, or if you want to call it a data center, more like servers in a closet, and paying for their own laptops, and only getting new laptops when there's some leftover money at the end of the year. So now you finally have a machine that isn't so slow that you go crazy doing your work. Like we are now at a level of IT service that is enterprise class, and it has required some additional investment from agencies that I would say were underfunded in IT and kind of operating on shoestring and bubble gum and baling wire. But now that type of resistance isn't there. I would say, if anything, there's more of a desire for us to lead in this space, and which is, just something that we want to balance as we are the IT service department. So some of the questions that get into like environmental impact, we need to have our partner agencies involved in that as well. That's not MNIT's bailiwick per se, but we want to be a leadership force on the topic to bring those voices together. And along with the TAC, we feel like that we've made good progress in that.
Members of the commission, I'm going to cut this short because we still have another topic to get to. We have a lot of testifiers on that next topic, and I want to be fair to them. They've been waiting here all day. So if we can save our questions, we would love to have you back again. Deputy Commissioner, thank you for being here and for this very good information. We do have one more testifier on this. Mr. Neumeister, if you can be brief.
Co-chairs, commission members, Rich Neumeister. It's important to know that AI is happening on the local and state level. And it's been happening for a great number of years in its embryonic way of what we call predictive analytics, predictive policing, whatever it may be. You've already heard of Exxon selling Draft One and all that. So it's all over there. If you look at the testimony of Minnog and myself, you'll see some things that you, as the legislature, can do. My experience has been you push a bill in and they come out of the woodwork. So if you want to get an idea of what's happening, put in some bills that bring in some accountability and transparency. One of the things that I want to give you as an example, in 2019, there was discussion about putting scores on juveniles that Ramsey County was pushing with the sheriff, Troy's office, and all that. The public knew about it. They went back and said, you're not going to do that. So one of the things that's so important is transparency and accountability, that these folks had hard questions to talk about. I served on for 22 years on the CrimNet board. That's the one that designed all the criminal justice databases, connections, and all that. And there were one or two of us who were appointed to sort of sometimes be the conscience of the public. This TEGA board, I can see legislation, rather than a bunch of techies and government types, let's have some public members on there to ask those questions. And Madam Chair, just in comment, is there are a lot of things happening that the public may not know about. One of them that the cybersecurity people know about is that there is discussion right now of having a single password and a single identifier for residents to interact with their government. And I'm sure of cyber, but also that has AI implications too. So it is, thank you very much for having the hearing on these comments.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Neumeister. I'm sure this is not the end, but only the beginning. We're going to move on to our next topic of enforcement and compliance. And we're going to try to ask people to limit their testimony to about 3 minutes. The first person I have is Dr. Bibi Nauman. Please come to the testifiers table. On deck is Amanda Brodhag for the Hennepin County Public Defender's Office. If you could take a seat at the table as well so we can move this along quickly. Go ahead and introduce yourself for the tape and begin your testimony.
Chair, co-chairs, and members of the Legislative Commission, thank you. My name is Dr. Bibi Newman, and I am a resident of St. Anthony Village. Yesterday, the director of the Data Practices Office provided this commission with a remedies chart showing that Minnesota's enforcement structure under Chapter 13 is limited, inaccessible, and crucially incapable of resolving most disputes. Advisory opinions are non-binding. The administrative process requires a $1,000 filing fee, and district court remains the only true remedy for residents. I want to show, this chair is uncomfortable. I want to show you what that structure looks like in practice. The Government Data Practices Act is designed to ensure that Minnesotans can understand and, when necessary, challenge the actions of their government. But in practice, the Act functions unevenly across the state because its enforcement mechanisms are limited. What I have encountered, both personally and alongside others seeking data, is not a series of misunderstandings. It is a structural pattern. Residents frequently face improper clock resets in which clarifying questions restart statutory timelines without authority. Many are told to resubmit requests on local forms, even though Section 13.03 does not require or authorize such forms. Agencies often send expiring Dropbox or box links instead of providing data directly, and when the links expire, the residents bear the burden of restarting the process. When data is withheld or destroyed, required notices are routinely absent, leaving the requester unable to determine whether a denial is lawful. These failures harm Minnesotans statewide. In metropolitan communities, transparency barriers limit the ability to document disproportionate enforcement or verify the use of surveillance technologies. In rural communities, a single delayed response can halt property decisions, impede oversight of law enforcement activity, or leave residents without recourse because legal and advocacy resources are limited. Different contexts, but the same structural harm. A right that cannot be invoked reliably becomes unenforceable in practice. Minnesota is also expanding its use of ALPRs, body-worn cameras, drones, and AI-driven decision systems. These technologies generate large volumes of sensitive data, some used in cooperation with federal partners. Oversight depends entirely on the public's ability to access information about deployment, retention, sharing, and misuse. The pace of technological adoption has outstripped the pace of statutory enforcement. And
Dr. Nauman, if you could wrap up, please, that'd be great. Thank you.
thank you for your attention and for the Commission's work on this issue. I have provided written commentary.
Okay, members, the doctor has some written testimony in our packets. Please look at it. She's been kind of through the ringer with some of this data stuff, so thank you for being here and for testifying. I'm sorry we're kind of short on time, but thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, co-chairs. Thank you, members.
Amanda Brodhag, please introduce yourself at the tape and go ahead with your testimony.
Good morning, co-chairs and other members of the commission. My name is Amanda Brodhag. I have, for the last just over 9 years, had the privilege of being an assistant public defender for Hennepin County. I want to give a little bit of context very quickly about how a process goes when a client of mine is charged. When they are charged with a crime, I am then given and I demand discovery. Discovery is governed under the Minnesota Criminal Procedure Rules, which is not governed by the Data Practices Act. Normally, in the course of discovery, I get police reports, which are mostly non-public. I get body-worn camera, which is also non-public. I am governed by a standing order from the Chief Judge of the 4th District that says that I cannot provide my clients copies of body-worn camera because there's protected data from other people around the videos. I'm able to review it with my client so that they can see it. That means if they're in custody, I can review it with them. If they're out of custody, I can review it with them, but I cannot provide them copies. We've been operating under this system for many years. It is my responsibility as a member of the board, or excuse me, as a member of the bar and an advocate for me to review all of that discovery and provide advice for my client as far as what we want to do and hear what they want to do with their case. I'm here today because there is a certain task force through the Hennepin County Sheriff's Office that is refusing to provide the prosecutors, once they charge my client with a case, the discovery, the body-worn camera, unless I sign a stipulation saying that I will not play that video in court in an open forum unless it is redacted. As I said, I've been doing this for many years. This practice started around 2022, 2023. I provided written testimony also to help give some context and some history surrounding different events that have been happening in Hennepin County, but we find this practice particularly troubling. These officers are claiming and using the Data Practices Act to state that they are undercover, and therefore their videos and their discovery should be shielded from public scrutiny, from the public eye in a public courtroom. These officers, I will tell you, I have read their reports, I have seen some of their videos after we go through a litigation process to be able to get these. These officers are not undercover. These officers are wearing vests that say sheriff. They're wearing ballistics vests that say sheriff. They're wearing body-worn camera attached to their uniforms. They may be wearing jeans and a black t-shirt or a black sweatshirt, but they are certainly law enforcement officers. They are initiating traffic stops for low-level offenses such as broken taillights or expired registration or for failing to turn 100 feet before a turn. These officers are going into jails. They are giving individuals their Miranda warning in order to take their statement. Now, inherent in giving somebody a Miranda warning is letting the individual know that they are confronted with law enforcement so as to not give away their privilege. These people are then told face-to-face that they are law enforcement and then later in court claiming that they're undercover. These officers are interrupting the process of custody as far as evidence. They are moving evidence from one secure evidence locker to another, to theirs. And so if they were to come to court and testify, which they would have to do if the prosecutor wanted to be successful in prosecuting my client, they would have to come in person and testify, again, giving their name and clearly not being undercover. It is extremely concerning that I am not able to get access to my client's discovery in the regular course of business, in the regular course of what the rules say I'm entitled to under the Minnesota Criminal Rules of Criminal Procedure.
Thank you, Ms. Brode, but that's 3 minutes, I'm sorry.
That's fine.
Thank you for bringing this to our attention. It's a concerning detail. Thank you very much.
Just wanted to be able, I do know that the written testimony is quite long. I apologize for that, but I think that it gives the appropriate context.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Appreciate it. Next is Tori Key from the League of Minnesota Cities, and on deck is Bob Katnack. If you want to both come to the testifiers table. Go ahead, Ms. Key.
Good morning, chairs and commission members. Thank you so much for having me here today. I'm Tori Key with the League of Minnesota Cities. I appreciate being here to represent the 841 member cities of the 856 in the state of Minnesota. Every city across the state is bound by the Minnesota Government Data Practices Act and works hard to comply with record retention, privacy, and disclosure requirements every day. I have had the privilege of working with our member cities for almost 4 years now, and I've experienced the vigilance of city staff, council members, and their attorneys in understanding their obligations and fulfilling those obligations as it comes to data practices requests. The League does provide a number of resources and support for cities when it comes to data practices, from in-person trainings, e-learning trainings, special work groups, partnerships with the City Attorneys Association, the Public Law Section, and our research team in particular has answered at least 100 inquiries this year on Data Practices Act and compliance this year. Cities recognize the need for good record-keeping, transparency, and accountability to the public. At the same time, staff are spending more time than ever on responses to a flood of requests that are governed by Chapter 13 and other laws. From newspapers trying to meet publication deadlines, attorneys attempting pre-litigation discovery, to crime victims seeking protection from their assailants. Responding to these citizen needs are in addition to their other job duties like issuing permits, processing utility payments, administering elections, conducting financial budgets. We have a 37-page calendar of important events on our website that helps city administration anticipate and conduct their necessary business functions throughout the year. In some cases, cities must hire out the functions necessary to produce data, such as redaction, because their small staffs don't have the either technical knowledge or the time or ability to complete the necessary searches and redactions that are required under the Act. Just to keep it short, I'll say that we've talked about earlier that data can be mixed, the non-public and the public data, and that does require compliance with the Data Practices Act, obligations to protect that non-public data. We must ensure that only public data is being shared, things like social security numbers, in employment data, ensuring information on location data for safe-at-home participants is protected, redacting protected judicial officer data in property records, which was passed last year, or even pulling out incidental data like an e-newsletter subscription that maybe references that key search term that was requested. Cities have to balance these needs to protect their data while being aware of response times, working with requesters to provide data they hope to avoid, the data they hope to find while avoiding, trying to avoid any behavior that might be seen as adverse, like limiting the data request by asking questions like, what is the purpose of your request? In summary, I'm excited to be here and work with the stakeholders, the commission, and the legislators as we go about looking at Data Practices Act and how it is working in our state. We have 856 cities with all unique characteristics, small cities and large cities alike, and so I hope that you'll consider those different needs throughout this legislation. Thank you so much for letting me be here today, and I'm happy to answer questions here or else.
Thank you, Ms. Key. Appreciate it. Mr. Katnack, go ahead and introduce yourself and continue on with your testimony, please.
Good morning, Madam Co-Chairs. My name is Bob Katnack. I have submitted written comments. I won't repeat them here. If you look at them, you'll see why I'm even here. This is not what I do, but I kind of got roped into it. So I've been, I guess, fortunate to see a cross-section of how this Data Practices Act is working as a practical matter. First, it's a great statute. I mean, we are fortunate to have the attention that was given to the statute, and it's really a good thing to have as members of the public. The problem is, it is not working as the legislature intended it to work. And there are two reasons for that. One is cultural, and the other is structural. Culturally, a data requester is often met with resistance, if not an adversarial relationship. And I get that the cities have a lot to do. So this is not a one-way street. It's got to be a good balance. The problem is this. When there is let's call it a difference of opinion, I need this, no you don't, you're moving too slow, no I'm not, there is an imbalance of resources. I think most of the requests go to entities that have significant resources to respond or choose not to respond or defend themselves. The requesters have no such resources. They have no place to go. So I've offered a couple of things in my written testimony that I hope you'd consider. They're thoughts. They're not finished products. But I think if with respect, the act needs to be tweaked a little bit to be able to have restore some balance, and so that if there is a good faith request and it's not honored and it's not responded to in good faith, there should be consequences. And right now there are not. I would also say, and I didn't put this in my testimony, but it occurred to me as I was hearing this morning, there should be a flip side to that. If the government agency responds in good faith, and they've made efforts to clarify, they've made efforts to be responsive, that should be a defense. That should be I'm a lawyer, so that's how I think. That should be an affirmative defense. So I think there's ways to do this. You can bolster the resource piece disallocation, misallocation on the requester side, but you can also provide some safe harbor protections for the responder side. And as others have mentioned it, it's absolutely true, is you have to remain a balance. The last thing I'll say, and I don't want to overstay my welcome, I've heard a lot about the technology piece of this. One of my areas of knowledge, I guess, is data breaches. And there's a lot of really good technology out there on personally identifiable information. Let me tell you what I'm talking about. If you have a mountain of data that's been breached, you've got to go through that. Just as the government entity does, is there personally identifiable information in here before you release it? There are excellent software programs that where you can run that, and they can identify names, Social Security numbers. Madam Chair, I see you're shaking your head. You know that, but there ought to be a way to get. We can use technology to make, if you might, their job easier, and it should be made easier. And so I think there's challenges, but there's solutions. And I appreciate the chance this morning to speak to you, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you for being here, Mr. Katnack. Appreciate both of your testimonies. Very helpful. Next, we have John Casper, and then on Zoom, we will have Don Gemberling, and then Mr. Neumeister, you get a wrap up. So. Thank you for being here this morning. Go ahead and introduce yourself and continue on with your testimony. And I believe, Mr. Casper, do you have written testimony too that you've offered the commission?
Yes, I did.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Co-chair, members of the commission, thank you for the opportunity to speak with you this morning. My name is John Casper. I'm 66-year-old father of 3 daughters, 2 adopted sons, 20 grandchildren, and 2 great-grandchildren. I'll be the first to admit I probably played more sports in school than I paid attention in class, but the one subject I excelled in was civics. I truly believe our founding fathers were geniuses. They created the greatest document in human history for free men and women to govern themselves. From a young age, I learned the importance of civic involvement. I stood in a room like this as a 6-year-old child watching my father, a tradesman, testify. It inspired me so much that at 20 years old, I ran and won a seat on my city council. Today, I'm here because Minnesota data laws, specifically Statute 13, no longer serve the public the way they were intended. And I'm hoping what I say today can be bipartisan. Transparency is not a left or right issue, it's an American principle. Why we need a bipartisan rewrite of Statute 13. I've been working closely with my representative and keeping my senator and the neighboring district legislatures in the loop, along with the guidelines from representatives of the Department of Administration. He's extremely knowledgeable and professional and helpful, but he has no enforcement authority whatsoever. Through my work with him, I learned something that should concern every one of you. Minnesota data laws has not been meaningfully updated in 50 years. Half a century technology changed, government changed, the world changed, the law did not. And because of that, Minnesota's today face delay, obstructions, and let's be honest, sometimes outright law breaking by entities that know there is zero consequences for ignoring Statute 13. The public pays for the data, the public owns the data, the public can't access the data. That is not how a constitutional republic is supposed to function. Four core problems and why reform must happen now. Violations of Statute 13 carry no consequences. When an entity denies or redacts data, the law requires them to cite a specific statute justifying denial. That almost never happens. That is a direct violation. Instead, they stall, delay, drag things out, or repeatedly demand information they already have because they know nothing will happen to them. A law with no enforcement is not a law, it's a suggestion.
If you could wrap up in about 30 seconds, please.
I'll just wrap it up. You have my testimony, but I guess I would like to say this real quick, and I mean, absolutely mean no disrespect. And it wasn't my intention to say this, but I mean no disrespect, but our founding fathers partly fought a revolutionary war on transparency. But yet, at this hearing, the bureaucracy gets all the time necessary, which seems to show them a garnered more attention. But we, the people, do not. I believe our country is founded on a government by the people, for the people. I don't think it's right that somebody gets to speak for a half an hour and I don't get 5 minutes to finish my comments. Thank you.
I'm sorry you feel that way. I've really tried to be fair. We did ask MNIT to come in and give a presentation. So, people, I do encourage you to look at Mr. Casper's written testimony. He does offer some suggestions for us. So thank you. Mr. Gemberling, are you there? Mr. Gemberling? You got your audio on? We can't hear you. There we go. Go ahead.
Thank you. Madam Chairs, members of the commission, my name is Don Gemberling. I won't say any more than that. I've given you written testimony as a citizen, not as the spokesperson for MNIT. Matt has already done a fine job of submitting information from us, from MNIT. I want to focus on three things, and I think I have the indulgence of going back, talking about three agenda items at once. One of the things that I highlighted in the interplay between state and federal government is the effect of how Minnesota protects citizen privacy. And you can look at the detail, but basically when citizen information is collected, people have to be told, among other things, who else will have access to that data. And that's one of the things that's difficult to enforce in the Data Privacy Act, but it's been a part of the law since 1974. So when the federal government comes and says, we want data on Minnesota citizens, which it seems to be doing quite a lot these days, the question is whether or not those citizens were told the federal government would have access to their data. Because they were supposed to, when they got that notice, be able to rely on what's in the notice to protect their privacy. I have elaborated on that in my comments. I suggest you look at it. On the issue of AI, one of the things I noticed is that there was some discussion about stakeholders, but it wasn't clear to me if stakeholders include the public when the MNIT made its presentation. And I did not see any detail in there on how MNIT intends to help these governing people that they've created, which I think is a good idea, by the way, to make sure that AI complies with all parts of the Data Privacy Act, not just the issue of public access, but also the issue of how our statute protects individual privacy. And referring to something Mr. Neumeister said, embedded in our statute since 1974 have been the Fair Information Practice Principles, okay? Which include things like being able to challenge accuracy and completeness of data. On the last point of compliance, in some ways, I'm kind of a leading expert on problems with compliance because I spent 29 years trying to help government agencies learn how to comply when I worked for the state of Minnesota. But again, I want to highlight one issue that hasn't been discussed. As I mentioned just a couple of minutes ago, embedded in our Data Privacy Act are the Fair Information Practice Principles. They include things like being able to get access to data about yourself, being able to challenge the accuracy and completeness of data, and also being the right to receive the notice that the government tells you what they're going to do with your data and who else can get it. That has the popular name Tennyson Warning, with some of you are familiar. However, how do you enforce, in the scheme of the current Data Privacy Act, the fact that I or anybody else did not get the required notice? And I can tell you, it's very hard to do. There are hardly any cases on this point. And I've just in the last few days had the experience of being asked by 2 different state agencies to fill out forms asking me for private personal data, and neither of those forms had a complete Tennyson warning, okay? So in your discussions about enforcement, don't forget the data privacy side of this issue. It's more than just public access to government data. And so I'm gonna look at my note. One thing about Senator Limmer. Hi, Senator, how you been? Part of what he just said is, how do we get ahead of the curve here? And there are ways to do that, And as a matter of fact, in 1974, thoughtful people in the legislature and frankly in the bureaucracy looked to the future and figured out ways to try and stay ahead of that future. I'm impressed with the continuing comments that the Data Practices Act doesn't accommodate current technology. Well, if you look at the definition of government data, you'll see that that's one way it tried to anticipate where technology is going. What it didn't anticipate was the kinds of technology that are in use now, like chats, texts, etc. And one last comment, I'm very concerned that somebody told the previous testifier that there have been no changes to the Data Practices Act in 50 years. As Senator Limmer and Representative Scott know, we've, over time, over the last 50 years, we've done all kinds of things, particularly in the area of improved enforcement. But more work needs to be done. And so if you have any questions right now, which you probably don't because of the time, and any questions in the future, you can always call on me, and thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gemberling. Mr. Neumeister, go ahead and wrap things up. And I do think that, given all this testimony today, I think hopefully we'll have some time reserved in our January meeting to have member discussion on this topic.
Co-chairs, members of the commission, my name is Rich Neumeister. There are a couple things I want at least to share of principles. One, in the Data Practices Act, keep records containing government data in an arrangement and condition that will make easy accessible for convenient use. That has been part of the law for 50 years, even more than that. So when government entities start looking at how you buy software, computers, and all that, they got to think of this. A lot of entities have not thought about that. And then that's where you get, oh, this big request and all that. The second part, in our law, it's very clear that we do have an extensive built-in flexibility in the law to where someone asks for everything under the sun, and many government entities get that, they're able to comply with the law and do it in a way that the government entities should engage the requester as long as also the requester should engage with the government entity. And what that deals with is to have effective training by the League of Minnesota Cities, by the Department of Admin, or whatever it might be. Because it goes on the last point, is that James Madison said that in order to keep a popular democracy, you need the information. And if you don't have the information to know what the government is doing, you don't have the popular democracy. So with the League of Minnesota Cities and the government entities and the associations, I say to them, I have worked with many, many people, just regular folks. Steve Crone is one of them. In regards, how do you get access to data? So it's important not to put barriers such as take away free inspection, which has been a wish list for the league for years, or to have certain kinds of information that Hennepin County is proposing, or take away a compliance thing that Hennepin County was talking about, which was part of legislation. And the thing is that there's a lot of people who can't come here, but some of the people like myself and many others represent some of those folks in many different ways. And the last thing, I think of Tony Webster, who on some of the things, who's asked for some of the data. And I was a testifier in his case last year with Hennepin County, and this is why some of the things that Hennepin County has proposed is because of that. I asked for the same data 10 years ago. I got it. It was all public. He asked for it several years later, couldn't get it. And I testified. So, Madam Chair, there's a lot of dynamics here. There are some things that can be agreed upon by all the stakeholders and some not, but we have to have discussion. So, Madam Chair, thank you very much for your comment, or your allowing me to make a comment, and all the many others. I have to compliment this commission as someone who was at the beginning of this commission, working with Mary Liz Holberg and others. You've gotten back on a trail that I think is important, to hear from the public and start engaging and educating your peers about these issues. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Neumeister. Representative Lucero, I believe you have a comment.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for the discussion today on all of the points on the agenda, including and especially this on data practices in Minnesota and enforcement and compliance thereof. The Data Practices Act in Minnesota is very much needed, and it helps to ensure that transparency so that government can be held accountable. And so one of the things that is very alarming that I wanted to briefly discuss or share is this headline that I saw. Minnesota can release records on Medicaid providers accused of fraud, but won't. There have been many headlines, Madam Chair, coming out of the Walz administration of potentially billions of dollars of fraud. And so when I see this headline, it definitely raises a lot of red flags, and did some digging and come to find out the Walz administration, in their attempt to mask accountability, put forward a provision that they tried to get passed into the state government omnibus bill last session, but they failed. They came back, not taking no for an answer, they came back and were able to get a provision into the Health, Children, and Families Omnibus Bill that empowered them then to have this discretion to shield them from the public information of which providers are having payments withheld that are suspected of engaging in fraud. That is the opposite of transparency, which is hindering accountability in Minnesota. And I wanted to draw that to your attention and to the Commission's attention that we definitely need to change that so that there is that transparency and accountability for the fraud that's occurring under the Walz administration. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Lucero. And I was part of the, in regular session, discussion on the bill about what happens around the transparency of when payments are withheld. And we reached a decision, and we had people, members of the Walz administration in the room with myself and a couple of other legislators. They agreed to the legislation, then they came back in special session and tucked it in somewhere where no one was really watching. And so I still believe it is murky now, but I still believe that they can, under current law, even though that was changed, I still believe they can share that information. So they just have to have the will to do so. Members, we will be meeting again in January. I want to continue the discussion on compliance and enforcement. And then Co-Chair Feist will have the gavel, and she's got some other things up her sleeve too. So stay tuned. Hey, Merry Christmas to everyone. Happy holidays.